Oh yeah, this was inevitable. Shantae was going to show up somewhere. You guys even called this in the comments because I make no secret of my love for this series. I've still got my original cartridge for the first entry. It's the most valuable anything I own, and I am never, ever selling it. As much childhood attachment as I have for this thing, though, I've always said that every new Shantae game is a quantum leap ahead of the last, because that's always been the case. I even thought the tradition had continued when Half Genie Hero came out. But now that it's no longer new, and I've had some time to reflect and let that game settle in my mind, I realize the always better than the last rule only used to be true. Yes, Half Genie Hero was fantastic and well made and gorgeous to look at, and fixed most of the problems with the dancing mechanic, all the ones they could anyway, and we haven't even seen all the DLC yet for the extra playable characters and costumes, and God, it's great. But if I had to choose just one game in the series to play right now, it would be Pirate's Curse. I love this game for the same reason I love Mario Galaxy 1 over its more polished sequel, the same reason I prefer Kingdom Hearts 1 to the technically and mechanically superior second entry. These games may have more to them in general, but the original has more where it counts. Kingdom Hearts 1 is much more Disney than Square Enix, whereas the sequel is the opposite. Mario Galaxy 2 has more stars and levels, but it loses the observatory and the general magic of the first game. Rosalina doesn't even show up until the end, what gives? Well, my bedtime story. And in that same vein, Pirate's Curse is a treat for fans of the series, because it's not just about Shantae, it's also about everyone else around her. There's so much heart in this game. So many cool moments like Poe's apology, the relationship that starts to unfold between Sky and Barracuda Joe, and the surprisingly humanizing moments that let you see the other side of the titular pirate, forcing you to realize that there's a person underneath all of that. It's almost disappointing playing Half Genie Hero after this, because you remember what those two went through together. And yet, in the next game, they're right back where they were before like nothing happened. Yes, some of this is played for laughs, but even then, it's done in such a way that you leave feeling like you know these people better than you did before. The writing here is just spot on from beginning to end. It's probably the funniest and most heartfelt the series has ever been. It has my favorite dialogue exchange in any video game, and if you want to see it, go back to Uncle Mimic's workshop after beating Tan Line Island and talk to Bolo. It's hilarious and sad and reveals so much about both the characters involved in it and the dynamic between them. All of it is like that in this game. You really get a sense of who these people are, what's going on in their head, and their relationships to one another from the way their dialogue unfolds. And think about that. These characters, who I've been following for 2 games now and already loved, are suddenly opening up and having things happen to them. Shantae has always been big on fan service, and in my opinion, Pirate's Curse knocks it out of the freaking park. That's because this is the good kind, the meaningful kind that rewards you for following along with the franchise for so long and being a part of this universe. Even the soundtrack gets in on the act, blending old favorites with brand new classics like Rave in the Grave. And that strong sense of nostalgia is weird because the gameplay is the biggest departure from series tradition they could have possibly done. To explain, Shantae doesn't have her genie magic anymore at this point in the story. That means no transformations, which was a downright iconic part of the character up to that point. Instead, you have to travel the world hunting down pieces of Risky's arsenal. So instead of fireballs, now you're shooting bullets. Instead of summoning storm puffs, you're charging through an entire room full of enemies with a scimitar. And although that has way less flavor than turning into a mermaid, it's so immediately satisfying from a mechanical standpoint that the community is still going back and forth on whether or not Shantae is better off without her powers. The decision only becomes harder the further you get into this game, when you start unlocking items like the scimitar and the ability to glide, the cannon which gives you extra jumps, and Man, the way all of those tools can be combined with each other just feels so good. And they actually test you on that if you want to collect everything. But that's just not who the character is. It flies in the face of the very concept of Shantae and robs her of one of her most defining features. But it's so much better from a gameplay standpoint. Let's see, stopping dead in my tracks every couple of seconds to dance and turn into a sexy monster girl, or having smooth action-packed gameplay. Swords, spiders, hats, harpies. You are tearing me apart way forward. It also doesn't help that Half Genie Hero lacks free roaming in traditional dungeons, which themselves were also a staple up until that point, and yeah, I gotta admit, without that openness and that sense of freedom you get from being able to seamlessly transition between dancing through danger and shopping in town, something just feels off, especially compared to the wondrous locations you visit in Pirate's Curse. Tell me you didn't have a fanboy freak out the first time you went through the Village of Lost Souls. The Metroidvania formula that got most of us hooked on these games to begin with is at its most defined and polished in Pirate's Curse, with tons of goodies to discover and secrets that will genuinely leave you stumped, all encouraging me to examine more carefully a world I've been begging to dive deeper into for years now. What it comes down to is this. Why would you shrink the world down when the last game did such a good job of opening it up? Probably because Kickstarter doesn't give you the kind of money to make a game that big and this good looking. Unless your name is A Hat in Time, of course. I'll openly admit, it's not the prettiest, or the best received, or even the most technically impressive game in the series. But Pirate's Curse is absolutely the most satisfying Shantae. And at least in my book, that counts for a lot.